My name is Sami Brar. I'm a recent graduate from the University of Alberta, and now I work at the Indo-Canadian Women's Association as their project and program coordinator. So this year, the project that we're working on is based on honor-based violence. And our whole purpose of this project is to really create awareness on this issue and understand that it's happening everywhere. So in the past, we did a project on this and we focused on the South Asian community, but this year we're focusing on diverse ethno-cultural communities and understanding why does honor-based violence happen and how does it happen. And then we're looking at service providers and seeing what are the gaps in service providing agencies, like what barriers do they face when dealing with victims of honor-based violence and trying to bridge that gap. So if somebody is a victim of honor-based violence, providing them resources of where do you go to get help? And if somebody's a service provider, like what do you do if somebody comes to you for help with honor-based violence? So that's what our project is working on, and we're pretty excited about it because it's a really big issue. Like I said, it's a global issue, but people don't really recognize how often it happens in Edmonton or the various forms it takes. And we always look at extreme cases like so-and-so murdered somebody in their family, and then we're like honor-based violence gets stigmatized with that. But honor-based violence happens in a diversity of forms, and violence happens in a diversity of ways. It's not just murder and physical abuse. It comes through emotional, psychological, sexual, and the effects it has and the effects it has on the victims is something that's kind of like a taboo topic that we don't look into or we don't examine it further, and we kind of just like leave it at its surface. Like honor-based violence is like this cultural problem in these communities, and it's people murdering or abusing their wives. And it's not that simplistic. So I think one of the biggest things we want to do is create that dialogue on honor-based violence, and really like show that it's a global issue that's affecting a diversity of populations. Honor-based violence isn't limited to any specific culture. Honor-based violence happens as a result of patriarchy. It happens as a result of power and control and the need to want to define somebody and controlling their actions. And we live in a patriarchal world. So honor-based violence happens in every society, in every culture. Yes, it is more prevalent in certain cultures and certain societies because of cultural norms and cultural attributions, but it happens everywhere. And I was talking about this in my presentation as well today, is that the best way to understand it is to break it down to the simplistic ways. How do you understand honor-based violence? And like, instead of looking at the extreme cases, look at the simple act of like, when you see somebody and they're dressed a certain way, you might use certain words to describe that person because you may not consider that an honorable way to dress, or like if a certain person's acting a certain way. So we can acknowledge that, and then from there, this mentality that we as individuals have and this mentality that society has, that this is kind of like what leads to honor-based violence. So rather than going straight to the problem, being like, oh, here's a case of honor-based violence, now how do we deal with it? It's taking preventative measures, and preventative measures start with us changing the way we think and the way we act. So I think that it all starts with the individual, and like, yes, acknowledging that in certain cultures it happens more, but again, like who in those cultures has the power to define those things? And it comes again back, I think for me, to a patriarchal society where you have a lot of issues of control and power, and especially control and power over women. When you look at statistics of like honor-based violence, they're so small because this isn't an issue people talk about. Because honor is something that is like so respected in the community that especially if it's related to your family, you're not going to want to go have a conversation with somebody and be like, oh, my father said this, or my brother said this, or my mother said this. Because we're raised in a society where you're told that stays in the home, that private matters are in the home. And it's like, when you have so many private matters happening in so many different homes, you don't realize that it's not a private matter anymore. And it's a really hard topic to create discussion on, but I think that creating safe spaces, using positive language and allowing people to express themselves in a way that they feel the most comfortable is the best venue we can go. But of course, like sometimes people are just not going to be comfortable, and it's not an issue that you're going to ever fully tackle, but at least we're trying.